by audio, but here we are again, and I am just telling myself that round 2 will be better. Please also just want you to note that today in California it is a windy, blustery, rainy day, so there will be some background noises that I cannot control, unfortunately, but I hope they are not too troublesome. So, with that said, let's get into today's video. If you are interested in true crime, which I imagine you are if you are here with me in the moment, you have likely heard the name Lorivallow Daybell, especially if you live in the United States. However, if you are unfamiliar with her, by the end of this video, you will know all about her. Throughout 2019 and 2020, her name dominated the media because her 2 youngest children vanished, and 3 people close to her wound up dead. Today we are going to talk about just how far this mother would go in the name of Jesus Christ and her belief that Doomsday was near. Before we fully dive in together, I am going to do my typical housekeeping requests. First request in the comment sections down below. You will find a pinned comment that lists 3 cases that I am interested in covering. Please take a look at that list and comment down below with the one that sounds the most interesting to you. I greatly appreciate and value my subscribers' assistance in picking what case to cover, and I want to do the ones that you all want to hear, so please take a look at that and comment down below. Second and final request, if you enjoy the content that you hear on this channel, please give the video a thumbs up, like the video, and subscribe. Okay, that concludes my requests, and let's go ahead and do a deep dive into Lorivallow. Before we go on into all of what everybody knows Lorivallow for, or what not everybody, it's not fair to say everybody, but what Lorivallow is known for, I do want to talk about who she was before her children went missing, and who she was in her earlier adult years. Lori was born in San Bernardino, California in 1973. When she was 19 years old, she married her high school boyfriend, Nelson Yanes, but soon after, they would divorce. At the age of 22, she married a man by the name of William LaGoya from Texas, but the pair would divorce in 1998. However, during their marriage, they did get pregnant and have a son by the name especially because Lori had found herself in a previously abusive marriage to Joseph Ryan. Lori and Joseph had their daughter Tylee, and Colby had been adopted by Joseph, but Lori would ultimately end up leaving him in 2005 after her son Colby would claim that he sexually assaulted him. So Lori would then enter into a bitter custody battle over Tylee with Joseph Ryan. And things got even uglier when Lori accused Joseph of sexually abusing Colby. But Joseph always refuted these claims, and he actually was eventually cleared of the accusations. So it is not confirmed for certain if they were assaulted, but whether or not that is true, let's say that it's a rumor, still that would certainly put doubt in people's minds. And you can imagine when her friends and family saw how lovely Charles Vallow was that they were just elated. Charles and Lori would go on to raise Ryan and Tylee together, and Charles did have children of his own from his previous marriage, but they were older, and Charles was older than Lori as well, so they were out of the house and more involved with their mother. But Charles and Lori would go on to raise Ryan and Tylee together in Chandler, Arizona. By all accounts, Lori and Charles did have a happy marriage. Lori was a fierce, loving mother set out to protect her children. In 2014, Charles and Lori would adopt J.J. Vallow, who was the grandson of Charles's sister, Kay Woodcock. Kay really felt that she was too old to raise JJ with her husband Larry, and they felt it would be better if he was raised in a family that could look after him better and with children closer in age. Also, Lori was younger, so she was able to be more of an active, hands-on mother role for him. And JJ had been diagnosed with autism, so they really wanted him to be in a loving, secure home. So Charles and Lori welcome JJ into their home, but Kay and Larry remained incredibly involved in JJ's life and were very devoted grandparents. Lori's daughter Tylee took an instant liking to JJ, and they had a beautiful bond between the two of them. She would even joke around that JJ was her child, and it's very cute when you actually see the video clip where she says this. Colby also really loved JJ, and so did Lori. They were all very connected, and it was a sweet family that had come together. And both Tylee and Colby both also really loved Charles, and they were very aware of the father figure role that he played well in their lives. So around this time, things were going really well, and this newly blended family would actually make their way and relocate to the Hawaiian island of Kauai. Lori had always been a member of the LDS Church, which stands for the Latter-day Saints, which is more commonly known, I think, as the Mormon Church. She grew up in the church as her mother and father, Janice and Barry Cox, and her brothers Adam and Alex Cox were active members. However, as the years passed, Lori would become an extremist and find herself going down a And as her religious theories grew, she started to share with friends that angels would come to her in her dreams and wake her up to communicate with her about the end of the world coming. She also would say that she didn't get much sleep because these angels were constantly waking her up, but she had learned how to live with that and learned how to go through her days with little sleep because the angels were on her side. And these communications started during her time in Kauai. Now, when she's living in Kauai, Lori meets a woman by the name of April Raymond. They meet at the LDS church where they lived on the island and end up finding quite a lot in common with one another. Both women had been divorced. Lori was on her 4th marriage, and both had been single mothers to their children. April ends up feeling really attached to Lori because of this, essentially because in the LDS church, according to April's testimony, being divorced was frowned upon, and she spent a lot of time feeling like an outsider. Despite being very actively involved in the church, April still felt like she would never measure up to the other LDS women, and then Lori comes along and she becomes somebody that April can relate to, but also she's also looked at kind of as like a beacon of hope because yes, Lori's on her 4th marriage at the time, but from an outsider's perspective, she has it all. She has a beautiful blended family, and she has a loving husband, and essentially, she made it, and she's no longer the single mom divorcee stereotype. However, during the 2 years that Lori and Charles live on Kauai, April started to see a drastic change in Lori's behavior. Lori would become obsessed with this doomsday ideology, and Lori began confiding in April that she really felt frustrated with Charles for not being as religious and spiritual as she felt that she deserved from her husband. Lori really wanted a spiritual powerhouse as her life partner, and in her eyes, that wasn't Charles. Charles definitely was involved religiously, but did not at all see things the same, especially as Lori travels down this rabbit hole. And this would be the point that Lori starts pulling away from Charles and really just pouring all of her energy and devotion into this doomsday ideology. And in 2016, after their 2 years worth of time on the island of Kauai, Lori, Charles, and the 3 children would move back to Arizona. And Lori's eldest son, Colby, would say that the time spent on Kauai was the time that this family unit was the absolute happiest. Now, things had already started to take a turn internally and emotionally for Lori at this point, but by the time they are back in Arizona for about a year, Lori's growing disdain for Charles just can't be hidden anymore. Sometime around 2017, relatives say that Lori's relationship with her children also changed. Her friends recall that around this time she began reading these doomsday books, and the author of these books was a man by the name of Chad Daybell. Chad Daybell Daybell wrote several books about preparing for the end of the world, claiming that he was shown visions of the end of the world. So, his beliefs of preparing for Doomsday, coupled with somebody like Lori who also shared these beliefs, was like pouring gasoline on a fire. Around December of 2018, Lori would launch a podcast with her friend Mel Gibbs called Feel the Fire. One of their special guests would end up being Chad Daybell, the author of those Doomsday books, who Lori had met in 2018 at one of his religious conferences in St. George, Utah. Lori's friends shared that there was an instant connection between the two. However, everyone in her life believed it to be purely professional as they started doing the podcast episodes together and really just connected on a religious level. And at that time, Chad lived right outside of Rexburg, Idaho, with his wife, Tammy, and their 5 children. And just a little information about them. Chad and Tammy Daybell married on the 9th of March, 1990 in Utah. They lived in Springville, Utah, where they founded Spring Creek Book Company, which is how Chad published many of his books, and Tammy worked as a school librarian. However, as you will come to learn, Lori's relationship with Chad was far from just professional. At some point, Mel Gibb, the one that was involved in the Feel the Fire podcast, hears Chad and Lori talking about zombies. And this was like intriguing to her. She didn't quite know like what this meant, but she comes to learn that these zombies they referred to were not exactly what you would imagine from The Walking Dead. These zombies, or Z's for short, were humans whose souls had been replaced by dark spirits. And one of the first zombies that Lori identified would be her husband, Charles. And Chad and Lori share the belief that they were called to save 144,000 people that would survive this nearing doomsday, and they would all together return with Jesus Christ. Now, because of this zombie belief, Lori believed her husband Charles was long gone, and that a demon by the name of Ned Schneider had taken over his body and was just using it as a vessel on earth. And she believed that this demonic spirit, Ned, had basically murdered Charles's spirit or removed his soul. Now think about this for a second. From Charles's perspective, he knows something was going terribly wrong with his wife. Lori was acting strange, and she would even tell him at times that she wanted to murder him, because in her mind, this wasn't her husband, this was a demonic spirit. One night in 2019, when Charles was away on a business trip, Lori accuses him of having an affair and stated that she had the proof to back up these claims. Upon return from his business trip, Charles would arrive at the airport to find that his truck was missing. Lori had even canceled his flight home, forcing him to get another ticket. One of Lori's brothers, Alex, had taken the spare keys and removed the truck from the theories. While Adam was incredibly worried about his sister's well-being and also has a relationship with Charles, and they both work together to try to find a solution to what's going on with Lori. Now, to make matters worse for Charles, when he arrives home after his flight is canceled and he has to get a rental car, he's not able to get into the house. No one was home. The lights were off. The locks had been allegedly changed, and the $35,000 in his bank account had been drained. So at this point, understandably so, Charles contacts the police because he is worried about Lori's mental state and the safety of his children. Now, it is important to note that before contacting the police that night, prior to his business trip, Charles had already submitted a petition for Lori to be involuntarily committed to a mental health facility due to the state of her mental health. However, this would never occur. Charles was very much aware that Lori needed serious help, but the authorities would not take him seriously. In fact, the following day, Lori would meet face-to-face with the police at the local police station. Now, Charles knew that Lori would go to Tylee and JJ's school the next day to drop them off, and so Charles's plan was to intercept them there, basically to make sure his kids were okay and try to have a conversation with Lori. But this would basically just turn into a harassment call that required the police show up and required both Charles and Lori come to the station for statements. Now, I watched the clip of how the police interact with Lori during her statement at the station that day, and when I tell you it's ridiculous, I mean it. The police overseeing this interview completely fell victim to Lori's siren song. And I say siren song because based on Western standards, like Western society, Lori is like the spitting image of beauty. She is thin, she is blonde, blue eyes, I'm pretty sure, beaming smile. She is physically beautiful and very much fits the standard of what beauty looks like in the United States, and these police officers are just enthralled with her, and it's honestly disgusting. So she basically has them wrapped around her finger, and during her time with them, when she's giving her statement, she expands on the marital issues she's having, and this is what she says to the police. Quote, "This time I caught him cheating and I had evidence and I told him about it. And he travels a lot for business, so I told him about it and I told him not to come home and that his stuff would be gone and his car would be gone. He was a little mad." End quote. So, Lori has these police officers just eating out of the palm of her hand. One of the officers even tells Lori about Charles's petition to involuntarily commit her, and he advises her to not open the door if the police were to come knocking on her door to enforce this. And she's literally sitting in front of them, and they don't even move forward on this petition because they believe that she's of sound mind. You know, she's a master manipulator. She's well-spoken. She's attractive. She's put together. So they let her leave, citing that they do not believe her to be a danger to to herself or others. I would encourage you keep listening if you want to see just how far from the truth that would be. So, as of February of 2019, Charles files for divorce from Lori. He claims that she views herself as a god preparing for the second coming of Christ, and that he feared for the safety of his children, according to court documents. Charles also claims that his wife has threatened to kill him and would kill him if he got in her way to see this mission through. However, Charles and Lori's marriage was not the only ticking time bomb. One of the most challenging parts of this case is that there are so many different things happening at one time. But let me talk about something briefly. So, Lori's niece, Melanie Boudreaux, divorces her husband, Brandon, around the same time. Brandon and Melanie had greatly grown apart because she followed in her Aunt Lori's footsteps and believed she was meant to be a part of the second coming of Christ, whereas Brandon, much like Charles, did not buy this. So I wanted to mention that, but we will get back to Brandon and Melanie later. So for now, let's fast forward to the summer of 2019. On June 29th of 2019, Charles discovered a letter wrote in his name asking Daybell to come to Arizona to help him write a book. Charles reportedly told Lori to come clean about her relationship with Daybell, and that if she did not, he would contact Tammy Daybell, Chad's wife, to expose the truth. But, as you can imagine, Lori was not going to stand for anything interfering with her plan. And in her mind, this is some demonic, satanic work through Ned. So, on July 11th of 2019, Charles would be shot in the chest 2 times at Lorivallow's new home. Tragically, he was declared dead at the scene in Chandler, Arizona, at the age of 62. Charles had been shot by Lori's brother, Alex, in a claim of self-defense, stating that Charles attacked him with a bat and Alex had to resort to firing his weapon. I listened to the 911 call that Alex places, and he very calmly calls the police and explains that he had shot his brother-in-law in an act of self-defense. Police were called to the 5500 block of South Four Peaks Place at around 8:30 in the morning on Thursday the 11th, where they began investigating. Alex wasn't even detained. They tell him to come out of the house without a weapon, and then they just let him sit on a curb. It's quite bizarre. But it would be ultimately determined that only the first shot fired from Alex's gun could have been considered in self-defense. And based on forensics, the second bullet that entered Charles's body occurred when he was lying on the ground. Now, while all of this is going on, Lori is taking JJ to school, and her daughter Tylee is with her. They take him to school. I think they drive through Burger King, and then I think they go on one other errand, but then they return home. And if you watch the police body cam footage of when Lori arrives home, it's eerily freaky how calm she is, knowing that Charles is dead. And she even shows the hint of a smirk a time or two. This woman shows absolutely no sadness in the loss of her fourth husband. And so the question is this because she believes that Charles had been long gone and now Mr. Schneider, the demon, was finally dead? Or was this just some part of her master plan? Now this next part just makes my blood boil. So Charles is now dead, and remember, he has children from another marriage. And she takes it upon herself to relay to these kids that their father is now dead. But she does it by the means of text message. No phone call, no meeting in person, just a text message. And understandably so, his children are distraught and want answers, especially because they knew that things weren't looking so good between Charles and Lori. They knew that Charles had very real concerns about her mental well-being, and now all of a sudden their dad ends up dead, and she lies about the way he died. I think she says that he has a heart attack or something like that, and she delivers that news by text message. And once she sends the text message, she basically goes dark. These kids call Lori, they send her multiple texts asking questions, but she hardly responds. And when she does respond, she essentially plays the victim card and says, like, you know, I'm grieving, I just lost my husband, I am trying to put all these pieces together, but I still have to be a mom, I'm trying to put JJ to bed, like, I can't answer you right now. And Charles's kids are just like, what the hell, like, you can't be that busy that you can't talk to us and give us answers. So if I were them, I would be so angry. Now, within weeks of Charles' death, Lori would relocate with her brother Alex and her children to Rexburg, Idaho. And now remember, Mr. Chad Daybell and his family live right outside of Rexburg. And it's around this time that Lori and Chad's true relationship would begin to emerge publicly. According to records that were obtained just days after Charles is killed, Chad sends multiple texts to Lori in what investigation calls a romance novel. Chad, who is very much still married to Tammy at this time, describes in detail a sexual relationship between James and Elena, and these are names that Chad reportedly uses to substitute for himself and Lori so they don't get caught. On July 18th of 2019, a week after Charles's death, Lori reportedly texts Chad saying, quote, "So I talked to the insurance company. He changed it in March, so it was probably Ned before we got rid of him. They can't tell me to who, of course, but it's done. I'll still get the $4,000 a month from Social Security." End quote. So Lori had been removed as the beneficiary from Charles's life insurance policy, which I think is a brilliant level of justice in his death, but also just so sad that he even felt the need to do this. Now I also just want to go off on a little bit of a tangent and explain something that is important to this story. So back to this whole zombie concept. Chad and Lori basically had a running list of people in their lives that were zombies and those that were not. They would have a person's name, and next to their name they would either write an L or a D. The L stood for light and the D stood for dark. And then with either letter there would be a number basically ranking them of just how dark they were or how light. If a person had a D next to their name, they were considered a demonic or dark spirit, and they were then determined to be a zombie. If they had an L next to their name, they were considered a light spirit and would be a part of the 144,000 people that would be saved during this Doomsday moment. Basically, what ends up happening is that anybody who is supportive and loving towards Chad and Lori become light spirits, and anybody that gets in their way, doesn't believe the same things, mocks them, they end up getting a D next to their name and are determined as dark zombies. However, this part that I will never understand when you look at this list, that they have both Tylee and JJ, Lori's children, have the letter D next to their name. They are considered dark spirits, and I don't know why, because they are just children, but keep that in mind. So, let's go back to Chad and Lori and this whole death of Charles Vallow. So, 2 months after Charles dies, Chad signs an application with his wife Tammy on September 8th to increase her life insurance to the maximum amount allowed on her policy. I really was unable to find much information as to why Tammy agreed to this or how Chad phrased this to her. Because in my mind I would be questioning why are we increasing the policy amount, but I will say that I am likely looking at this from a very different perspective than she was, and I don't want to speculate or make any assumption as to her knowledge of her husband's affair or the death of Lori's husband, because I really just don't know, and I don't think it's right for me to make any assumption there. And I did read that Lori and Tammy may have been friends at one point, so there may have been some level of trust there, and she may have never suspected Lori and Chad of anything bad. So, the day after Chad and Tammy increased the life insurance policy, which is September 9th, Chad texts Tammy that he shot a large raccoon on their property and needed to burn some debris on the property. He tells her that he's buried this raccoon in the pet cemetery on their property. And for basically the rest of this video, I'm going to break this down in like an important timeline of events that transpire, because again, there are so many moving pieces. I'm trying to make this as clear and concise as possible. On October 1st, Lori rents a 10 by 10 storage unit from Self Storage Plus in Rexburg. Surveillance video at the storage unit shows Lori and a man visiting the unit 9 times in October and once in November. Often the man, who appears to be Alex, comes alone. Another visit shows Alex and a man who appears to be Chad. During one visit, Chad and Lori visit the storage facility together. On October 2nd, Brandon, who was the ex-husband of Lori's niece Melanie, returns from the gym to his home when he says he was shot at with the bullet missing his head by inches. Remember, Melanie is the niece that is very much sharing the beliefs of Lori, and Brandon did not. Brandon is able to tell police that the shooter was driving a Jeep, and upon investigation, they discover the Jeep was registered to then deceased Charles Vallow. That same day, Lori would purchase a green malachite wedding ring on Amazon. 7 days later, on October 9th, Tammy calls 911 and says a masked man shot at her in her driveway. She posts about this experience on Facebook, saying she has no idea who the person was or why they would shoot at her. Court documents later indicate that, according to Alex's phone records and GPS location, he was on the Daybell property for 2 hours, hiding and waiting, and he attempted to shoot and kill Tammy that day. 10 days later, on October 19th, Chad calls 911 and says that Tammy has died in her sleep. Detectives visit the home and investigators rule the death as natural. The coroner does not perform an autopsy, and I have no idea why they didn't do an autopsy. And again, maybe that's because I'm looking at this from a perspective of somebody that knows the full picture, and maybe because Chad told them not to do an autopsy. You know, I don't know. I guess I don't know how that all works. But, you know, all in all, Tammy was a healthy woman. She wasn't old by any means, and so if I were somebody's spouse and they died unexpectedly in their sleep, you bet I would want to know what happened, or if there was some condition we were unaware of. But hey, that's just me. On October 22nd, Tammy is buried at the Evergreen Cemetery in Springville, and the family holds a memorial service in Rexburg the following day. Now, just 2 weeks after Tammy's death, Chad and Lori clear out their storage unit and disappear. Nobody knows where they are, and throughout this entire process, Lori's son Colby is constantly trying to get in contact with his mom or Tylee to make sure Tylee and JJ are okay. But he is never able to get a hold of Tylee, and Lori only tells him on occasion when he gets a hold of his mom that both JJ and Tylee are fine. Tylee had her own phone and Colby would text her, but there's a point in time where he notices that the responses that he gets do not match the way that Tylee communicates. And then shortly after that, Tylee's phone is shut off. On November 26th, the Rexburg Police Department conduct a welfare check for JJ at the request of his grandparents, Larry and Kay Woodcock. They had not talked to their grandson in months, and the police go to the last known address of Lori, which is her townhome on Pioneer Road. But he is not there, and it turns out that Lori has shared that JJ is staying with her friend Melanie Gibb in Arizona. And remember, Melanie is the friend that was involved in the podcast. Chad and Lori call Melanie and leave a message and tell her the police are going to call you to confirm if JJ is with you. Do not pick up the phone, or something along those lines. But when this happens, Mel is not okay and very upset that her friends, or who she thought were her friends, would put her in this position. And police soon determine that JJ is not with Mel in Arizona. So Mel contacts Lori and Chad about this situation and records their phone conversation. December 11th of 2019 at the age of 51. In a police interview months after his death, Alex's wife, Zulema, tells officers that a few days before he died, he told her that if anything happened to him, there was money in a bag for her hidden in a closet. She also shared with police that Alex had finally come to believe that perhaps Chad and Lori were using him as their scapegoat and were going to frame him. According to the medical examiner, Alex died from a pulmonary embolism due to clots found in his lungs, which, according to Alex and Lori's mother, actually was a genetic health issue in their family. Now, after months of trying to actually locate where Chad and Lori are, they are spotted in an airport in Hawaii in January of 2020. Police immediately jump on this lead and track down their whereabouts at a Princeville resort on the island of Kauai. Police come to learn that Chad and Lori got married at a private beach ceremony on November 5th, and in their wedding photos, she is wearing that green malachite ring she purchased from Amazon. And their wedding takes place just weeks after the death of Chad's wife, Tammy. Now, as you can imagine, this news just sends ripples throughout the media. Lori and Chad's family, the friends and family of Tammy and Charles, their kids, everybody is shocked at this news, and it leaves so many questions unanswered. And when all of this comes to light, police in Rexburg start to question if Tammy's death was not natural after all, and they proceed with exhuming her body for further analysis. Now, interestingly, Chad had shared with Lori, Alex, and his wife, Zulema, that he had had a vision telling him that his wife, Tammy, was going to die in a car accident. He figured that this car accident would take place on one of her planned trips to Utah. However, when she did not die as predicted, Chad believed that she had turned into a zombie. I want to share an exchange of quotes between a reporter and Lori that transpires when she is found in Kauai. The reporter asks, "Where are your kids?" Lori replies, "No comments." The reporter says, "No comment. They have been missing for 4 months and you have nothing to say. There are people around the country praying for your children, praying for you. Why don't you give us answers?" And Lori replies, "That's great." Now, leading up to this, a child protection action had been filed on behalf of JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan in Idaho. A court had ordered Lori to physically produce the two children to the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare in Rexburg within 5 days of being served with this order. However, as you can imagine, she does no such thing. And because Lori failed to physically produce her children, she was arrested on a $5 million warrant and charged with 2 felony counts of desertion and non-support of dependent children. She is also charged with arrests and seizures, resisting or obstructing officers, criminal solicitation to commit a crime, and being in contempt of court, willful disobedience of court process or order. Because Lori and Chad are in Kauai, Lori is extradited initial court appearance in Rexburg on March 6th. Hundreds of people wait in line hoping to catch a glimpse of the hearing where Magistrate Judge Farron Edens reduces her bail to $1 million and oversees the court proceedings. Her son Colby was present, in addition to her parents, as well as Charles's sister Kay and her husband Larry. Chad Daybell is also present in the court, as he has not yet been arrested on any charges. In the Netflix documentary Sins of Our Mother, which is about this case, Colby shares in his interview at how angry he felt at the way Lori looked at Chad in the courtroom that day, and how she constantly looked to him for support and nobody else in her family. She had a smile on her face much of the time and had a look of overwhelming love every time her eyes connected with Chad's. But during this time, the Idaho Attorney General's office was actively working on a charge of conspiracy to commit murder for Chad and Lori. Around 7 a.m. on June 9th of 2020, the Rexburg Police Department, FBI, and Fremont County Sheriff's Office serves a search warrant at Chad's home. During part of the investigation of his property, Chad calls Lori where she is incarcerated, and those phone calls are recorded, and you can hear him telling her that the FBI is searching his property. They exchange I love yous and then hang up, but there's also a point where she asks him if he is nervous, and he says no. As you likely can imagine, tragically within hours, investigators uncover human remains buried on the property that would be later identified as those of J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan. And it would ultimately be released that Tammy Daybell's cause of death was asphyxiation. Now, during the investigation process, a photo is determined and discovered through Lori's iCloud account, and it shows Tylee and JJ at Yellowstone National Park on September 8th. Lori and Alex were also with the children at Yellowstone that day, and that is the last known photo of the two children alive. Now, if you remember, September 8th is the same day that Chad and Tammy increase her life insurance policy amount. And the next day, September 9th, is when Chad texts Tammy and tells her that he has shot a raccoon on their property and buried it in the pet cemetery, which is just so devastating. Tylee and JJ's remains were found in the pet cemetery on Chad Daybell's property, and so many people think that when he texted Tammy about shooting a raccoon and burning debris on the property, that it was actually Tylee and JJ that had been killed and buried. As of the time of this filming, they have not faced trial. However, on January 9th of 2023, Chad and Lori Daybell are set to face a joint trial. They both have pled not guilty to their respective crimes. Lori's includes the murder of Tylee, JJ, Tammy, and Charles, while Chad's includes the murder of Tammy, Tylee, and JJ. And it is yet to be determined if the trial in January will be publicly aired. And an interesting fact that I just learned, that this took place 2 weeks ago. the Netflix documentary, The Sins of Our Mother, that really highlights Colby. He was like the main person being interviewed. I think that was released earlier this year. So since the filming and release of the documentary, and since they've been arrested and awaiting trial, just 2 weeks ago on September 3rd of 2022, Colby was arrested for sexually assaulting his estranged wife, but the charges have since been dropped. There's never an excuse for sexual assault in my book, but I do want to say that I am not surprised that if this is true, that Colby got himself caught up into a very sad situation, because I cannot imagine the trauma that that guy is carrying after, not having his father in his life. His mother is clearly deranged and unwell. His only father figure ends up being murdered, and his 2 siblings are murdered at the hands of his mother. So again, that does not justify Colby's potential terrible actions, but it doesn't shock me that he would go down a bad path. So that concludes the case of Lorivallow, Daybell, and Chad Daybell. My heart just aches for the victims: Tylee Ryan, JJ Vallow, Charles Vallow, and Tammy Daybell. Please let me know your thoughts down below, and